And joining us now is former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Mr. Blair, thank you very much for joining us. If I may begin by asking you about the events that are unfolding in Egypt at the moment, do you think that President Mubarak should stay in power, or would a real democracy in Egypt be a good thing?
Well, this is a situation that's evolving the whole time. I think the most important thing is that anything that happens with stability and order attached to it. So, you know, I obviously worked with Egypt and worked with the president very closely over the Middle East peace process, which is my point of focus. But, you know, I've said this on many, many occasions over the past years. The Middle East is a region in transition, and the question is, where's it transiting? And in the end, I think there is a whole process of evolution and change that will occur, but it's got to occur in a stable way, in an orderly way, and in a way that actually gives us a strong set of social, political and economic ties that help the people of those countries.
But as we've seen elsewhere in the Middle East, in both in Lebanon and indeed in Gaza, sometimes when we get democracy, it actually ends up not being what the West wants.
Well, I don't think it matters, frankly, whether it's what the West wants or not. It's a question of whether, if you then get a democratic outcome, that the democracy stays in place. So that's the difficulty. And particularly when you're dealing with some of the Islamist tendencies and those who actually are not merely political parties but also armed groups, that's a slightly different situation. So you've got, look, you've got a number of different elements operating in the Middle East right now. You've got you know, a younger generation that obviously want greater moves towards democracy and freedom, but you've also got extremist movements that actually want to take their countries backwards, and then you've got people who've often been in power for a long period of time who've got to manage this process of change. And I think, you know, all of us, when we're looking at this, but are actually based on in the region and trying to sort out the problems of the region, you know, we want to see change, but it's got to be change of the right sort and change that is done in a stable and orderly way. Now, you know, if you take the Palestinian-Israeli situation, which is what I primarily focus on out there, you know, we want a democratic Palestinian state, a viable Palestinian state next to a secure state of Israel. But it's important that democracy in Palestine is actually protected.
So is that two-state solution still the only solution that is going to work? Or is there a feeling now that a single-state solution may rear again as a potential solution?
Well, every time, Andrea, I always talk to people about a single-state solution, I say to them, what exactly do you mean by that? Because essentially you've got two peoples that need to live side by side with each other. The sensible way of doing that is for each of those peoples to have their own state. It's actually a very small bit of territory, Israel and Palestine. The opportunities, if peace is made, are absolutely vast. I mean, I work primarily on the capacity building and economic side with the Palestinians. The West Bank economy actually has been growing strongly in these past few years, but it could be the most enormously productive economy if we got peace with a proper Palestinian state, properly governed.
And how damaging,
so, you know,
how damaging were those leaked documents that appeared to show that division between what the Palestinian leadership were doing, albeit supposedly in private, and the wishes of the Palestinian people?
Well, I think that what was done was meant to destabilise the process. And, you know, you've got to question why people would want to do that. I also think we've got to get a little touch of reality into this. There has been multiple peace processes over the past few years, which we've been trying to bring to fruition. Many of the things that were talked about at Camp David in 2000, President Clinton, then Prime Minister Barak and President Arafat. These issues aren't new. You know, the trouble is sometimes when things are put out like this, if they're put out with a certain colour or spin on them, then they seem to surprise people. But actually, this is what you'd expect in a negotiation. And anybody who deals with the Palestinian leadership knows that they're sitting there fighting their corner very hard, as you'd expect in a negotiation. But of course, people are exchanging ideas the whole time. If they weren't, frankly, that's when people would and should get worried.
And moving on to talk just a little bit about what's happening in the United Kingdom at the moment. We've seen a contraction in the GDP. Is it time to implement a plan B here in the UK as far as the economy is concerned? And if so, what would that plan B be?
Look, I think the first thing you've got to do is take a fairly, cold, hard, long look at the figures and work out what they really mean. I mean, I don't think anyone quite knows what those figures mean at the moment, frankly. I mean, we did have a spell of really, really bad weather in the UK that must have had an impact on, say, the retail sector. In fact, I know it did at the time. So I just don't think you can tell. Look, the issue for the UK is very simple. It's about reducing the deficit, but reducing it in such a way that you don't choke off growth in the economy. Personally, I regard that not as a left-right issue. It's a matter of judgment. And, it's for the government of the day to make that judgment. But, all over Europe, countries are reforming, reducing their deficits, making changes. It's perfectly sensible for people to do it.
Now, you, in your memoirs, you were quite clear that you would have preferred to have started cutting the deficit back in 2005. If that had happened, do you think it would have kept Labour in power? And what difference would it have made to the economic crisis that we face right now?
Look, I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. But you see, for all of the countries in Europe, and counting Britain as part of Europe for these purposes at least, all of us are facing situations where, in a changing world with power shifting east, with new economic competitors, great opportunities but great competition there, it's just a statement of the obvious, frankly, that we've got to reform our public services, our welfare systems, because of changing demography, changing consumer expectations, because of the way the world is today. So I don't think it's very surprising that countries are making these changes. And frankly, I think what the economic crisis has done in Europe is not create the need for these changes. It's, in a sense, simply exposed the need for them and given it a certain push and acceleration.
When you look at the coalition government in the UK and David Cameron's role, David Cameron's speaking in Davos at the moment, he's often called the heir to Blair, maybe tongue-in-cheek. But when you look at what the coalition is doing right now, how much difference do you see from the new Labour policies of 2004-2005?
Andrea, one of the things I try to do nowadays is kind of steer clear of UK politics, and I've got enough on my plate with the Middle East. Look, I think you mentioned my book. I think most people know where I stand on these issues. I personally believe that today's politics works best with a combination of a strong competitive economic policy which business feels comfortable with, and a social program that is helping those that are left behind, building public services of a modern sort for people. And I think you look around the world today, some of these issues to do with left and right can be somewhat exaggerated, frankly. I think that the single biggest question for most countries today is, in the light of a changing world, how quick are you prepared to adapt? How much are you prepared to adjust? And those that do adapt and adjust do best. Well,
looking at this changing world, you are in Davos, of course, and the banking crisis is something that's never very far away from the top of the agenda. Do you get a feeling there that there really is a push to have global reform of the banking sector in a way that will prevent the kind of financial crisis that we saw in 2008 from reoccurring?
Yes, I do think that. But I think the question is, what's the best type of reform? And, you see, in the end, people sometimes say to me, well, how did the politicians fail in the financial crisis? And I say to them, look, everyone failed. But the problem was people didn't spot what was happening. They didn't analyse and understand what the new financial instruments, the new interconnectedness of the world economy really meant. Now, I think you do need global supervision. You need regulation that allows you to understand what is happening, that allows you to track it and deal with it before a crisis emerges. But you also need a vibrant, dynamic financial sector. A good financial sector is an important part of a good economy and a good business environment. So there is a balance to be struck there, which is getting the right reforms in supervision and regulation, but getting them in such a way that you don't damage what has to be a vibrant sector for our types of economy to succeed.
Now, President Obama has called the bonus culture shameful. When you look at the bonuses, particularly there in Davos, do you agree with him that it is a culture that does have to be changed?
Look, what I agree with is it's sensible for companies to pay people by their actual results, and it's also sensible for companies to have some awareness of responsibility in the modern world and how public opinion is interacting with them. On the other hand, I think if you look at the challenges faced by our economies today, the single most important things, for example, like for the economies in Europe, is to have a financial sector that, yes, is responsible, but is also innovative and is actually doing the business the financial sector should do. And then I think we've got a clutch of other issues to do with how we develop our university sector, human capital, technology, how we get, the new type of green technology underway in economies like ours. All of these things which are really important. When the bonus issue hits the headlines, I totally understand why it does that. I don't think in the end it's what's going to determine whether our economies succeed or not.
Now, one of the big issues that was to be raised in Davos was the idea of the balance of world trade. How concerned are you about rising commodity prices and the effect that can have, particularly on the poorer nations of the world?
Well, I think everyone's concerned about that. And the issue, again, really is how, well, at one level, how you rebalance the world economy in terms of savings and consumption, but also how we make sure that we're developing those parts of the world, Africa being a prime example, which can help meet the growing demands of countries like China and India and others that are industrializing fast, where they've got an emerging middle class, where people will expect more and consume more. And this is where, the interconnectedness of the world, its interdependence is so acute. So one of the things that's been interesting for me here is doing various things and attending various meetings with people who are interested in Africa, because I do some charity work there and interested in investing in it. And this is really important. If we want to deal with these commodity issues, particularly food prices in the longer term, we need to be developing the agricultural base, we need to be using the arable land that we've got, and we've got to be using it effectively. And that requires development.
Indeed. Just before I let you go, there are concerns over Nelson Mandela's health. I know that you know him well and he became a personal friend. Have you been in touch with him?
I haven't been in touch with him, but obviously we keep in close touch with events, and everyone here is wishing him well. He's got huge numbers of friends and supporters, and people who admire and love him around the world, and they're all wishing him well at this moment.
Mr. Blair, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Davos.